Welcome to Islands of Resonance, the podcast for people who want to be clear, present, and effective in a challenging world. Together, we explore islands of meaning, models, perspectives, and practices that help you sort through complexity, process world events internally, and find your place in them. In this process, resonance is the inner compass needle that guides us towards greater wholeness. I'm Dennis Wittrock, sitting here together with my co-host Tobias Klose and today's guest, John Bunzl. Glad you're here.
I'm glad I'm here too. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we live in a time when trust in politics is eroding, not because people have stopped voting, but because many fear that their vote no longer makes a difference in the big issues, that the truly pressing problems like climate change, tax evasion, the AI race, nuclear disarmament, and so on are somehow beyond the reach of democratic elections. In our previous episodes on the meta crisis, we described a pattern responsible for this, the Moloch dynamic or the prisoner's dilemma at the state level. And no state dares to move forward alone because it risks competitive disadvantages. So everything gets stuck, not because of evil or stupid people, but because of an incentive structure that no one intended. And our guest today developed an idea 25 years ago that aims to structurally solve precisely this dilemma. So no world government, no appeal to the goodwill of the powerful, instead a concrete mechanism that uses the right to vote as a global coordination tool. And that's John Bunzl, and he's the founder of SIMPOL, Simultaneous Politics, and Ken Wilber called it the best we currently have for something resembling a genuine world governance system. And today, we will find out what it's all about. So thank you that you're here, John.
Thank you, Tobias. Thank you very much. Do you want me to comment on your introduction there? Or?
Yeah.
Well, you're invited to if you wanna.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems to me there are sort of two things to say. That in a sort of more meta sense, where we are now is nothing particularly strange, in the sense that economics always precedes governance. Okay, economics always runs ahead of governance, and what we have in it today is a situation where the economy is global, but governance is still national, and so that is the fundamental mismatch. It would be since we're actually the World Cup football is going on at the moment, it would be like trying to manage, to referee the football field when you only have, or you have 200 different referees for 200 different segments of the football
pitch.
field.
Yeah.
So obviously it doesn't really work. So in an economic sense, you have capital flows which can go across national borders, and you have anything that can move across national borders has an advantage over anything that is nationally rooted. So if you're a global investor, you can move your investments around, you can play one tax regime off against another to get the best advantage, or you can go to a tax haven. But if you are a government or an average person who is nationally rooted, you cannot, you're at a disadvantage. You are going to lose in that game. The other point that I want to make, to be, as you said, our votes become meaningless, and yet SIMPOL is encouraging us to use our votes. So people would think, well, there's a contradiction there. Well, actually, that's not the case, but let me explain why. the reason that our votes, one reason that our votes have become meaningless, is because with capital and jobs moving or able to be shifted around globally, every government has no choice but to keep its national economy internationally competitive. That means relatively attractive to inward investment and employers and so on. And so, because of that tyranny of what I call destructive global competition, this vicious circle, this need for all governments to stay competitive, it therefore doesn't really matter that much who becomes, whether the Greens become the government, or the left or the right or the center. Whoever becomes the government has to keep the economy internationally competitive. And that means that by and large, the policies that they have to implement conform to that very narrow band. Okay, I'm not saying there are no differences, but generally speaking, they have to stay within that span of options, which keeps the country economically competitive. And so people don't really understand that dynamic, but they sense that nothing changes, except that our problems get worse. So people are losing faith in voting. And this is also why you see this fragmentation of politics, where the mainstream parties, nobody believes them anymore. So you get these more extreme parties on both right and left who want to suggest that they can solve our problems. But of course, once they get into power, they're going to be stuck in the same competitiveness straitjacket like everybody else, right? Now, with SIMPOL, in a way, what we're saying is, well, our votes no longer matter, which is terrible, right? But then we can turn that round and say, well, since our votes no longer make much difference, well, why don't we have a little fun with them for a change? Why don't we do something a bit creative with them?
So, okay, so you're about to explain the mechanism, I guess. So
yeah,
before you go there, let's wind back a little bit, or start at the beginning, I would say, to really, understand the place you're coming from, or the kind of problem you're trying to solve, and how it happened. So, what is the story behind the creation of SIMPOL?
I'm glad you stopped me, Dennis, because otherwise we wouldn't have made much sense.
Yeah, right. So in your previous life, you were a businessman and a company owner, right? So what led you to take an interest in global governance? What the hell happened to you to make you do this, which brought you on this journey of 25 years of fighting for this kind of stuff?
Well, you're right. My background, I'm a businessman. We had our own family company trading in raw materials. And I think that was important because it gave me an understanding of how the global economy works to some extent. But I had no particular interest in politics, but and so the idea for SIMPOL came as a complete surprise one Sunday when I was having lunch with my family, and my mum was there, and the kids were talking about climate change because they'd been doing it at school. And then after the meal, my mother just turned round to me and said, "Well, John, what would you do about it? What would you do about climate change?" Nice question. Yeah,
it's a tough one, the easy one for dessert.
But it was such a strange moment, Dennis, because I kind of went inside myself, and I had what I later think might be like an altered state experience or something like that. So just in a very split second, I had this sort of tremendous unity consciousness moment, whereas it would have to happen simultaneously. And I didn't really understand the full implication of that, but it was such a powerful moment, and I realized that it was hugely significant. And I think that I realized sort of But as a business person, it would have to happen simultaneously because, any nation that moves first to cut carbon emissions has to increase taxes, it has to increase its regulations, and that is going to make its businesses less competitive, and they'll have to move elsewhere. But in fact, it won't happen because the government won't do it because it's too scared. And of course, I realize that every government is in the same dilemma, the same prisoner's dilemma, as you said. So I realized it would have to happen simultaneously. But not only that, it was that if it's almost like you could say it's like a group of kids fighting over a packet of sandwiches in a playground, in a school playground. Any kid that gives up the fight loses a chance of getting the sandwiches, right? But if they all keep fighting, the probability is the sandwiches will just get destroyed in the fight, and nobody will get anything, right? So that's exactly the kind of sorry.
A very mushy sandwich, in the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the predicament. So with simultaneous action, I realized, well, in principle, no nation loses out if all the sufficient nations act together at the same time. No nation need lose out. Everybody wins. These problems can then be solved cooperatively.
Yeah, nothing easier than that. Get consensus of all the nations on the planet, no problem, right?
Well, that's right. That's exactly the problem. But what I realized is that also this was something that could be channeled through the vote. Okay, because in a sense, yes, our votes have become meaningless, but also if we agree to do something in the future simultaneously, we can approve that now without without it affecting. In other words, the fact that we have to carry on competing in the current context is separate from the fact that we will cooperate together in the future context. Okay, so you can carry on competing, but you can still communicate with one another about what could we do if we stop fighting and cooperating. Mm-hmm. And in that way, the ability to use your vote becomes it doesn't conflict with what's happening now. Okay, so you can be a conservative and still support SIMPOL. You can be a hard leftist and still support SIMPOL. And what that means is simply that you, as a citizen, you commit to giving strong preference at future national elections to politicians who've signed the pledge to implement the simultaneous policy. Okay, so that doesn't mean, so if you have a particular politician who has signed the pledge, you don't have to vote for him or her, but what you're telling all the politicians is that they're going to be much, much more likely to get your vote if they sign the pledge. And from the politician's point of view, there's no downside, there's no disadvantage in signing the pledge because they don't have to implement. In fact, they can't implement SIMPOL until all the sufficient nations are on board. But they can sign up to pledging and thereby gain additional votes of SIMPOL supporters.
Yeah, okay, even if it doesn't come together in the end, right?
Even if it doesn't come together in the end, there's no guarantee.
They gain the votes of the voters who pledged for the SIMPOL pledge.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And so, it depends on the electoral system in each country, Dennis. Mm-hmm. But so, in the UK, for example, we have what we call first past the post. You have a single member. Every seat is a single member representing a certain area. And at the election, you have like 4 or 5 candidates competing for that election. And what we find is, especially in areas where the previous election was won or lost on quite small numbers, quite often, this has happened a number of times at previous elections, we maybe get the Green Party candidate to sign up, right? then we send a nice little email to his competitors, and we say, oh, one of the other candidates has signed the SIMPOL pledge. Why put yourself at a competitive disadvantage?
Yeah.
Don't lose out. And then the Liberal Democrat will sign up, then the Labour, then and so we've there's a kind of domino effect, because
Right.
so in a sense, SIMPOL is using the vote to turn the competition problem on its head by using it to bring the politicians into competition with each other to do what we need them to do. Okay,
Right.
so it's completely the other way around to what we normally think about with politics.
Yes, interesting. But before we go deeper into this mechanism of SIMPOL, maybe we can create some more understanding. You were talking about destructive global competition. That means so there's a difference to competition. Not all of the competition itself is not bad, but when
Yeah,
it gets destructive, and
exactly.
maybe you can point out a little bit about that and maybe outline which global problems and issues cannot be solved at the national level from your perspective.
Again, Tobias, thank you for stopping me from running too far ahead. No, you're absolutely right. So destructive global competition is what I was describing earlier. It's this fear that each nation has. Each nation would like to do more to solve climate change, for example, but it fears that if it moves too far ahead of others to regulate and tax emissions, its economy will suffer. And of course, all nations, all governments are playing the same game, which is why regulation is sort of moving ahead very slowly, but emissions continue to move ahead much faster. So that's the dynamic. And the problems that it applies to, well, climate change obviously is one. Corporate tax levels is another. Regulation of artificial intelligence is another, because countries are racing to develop this technology and don't want to fear that regulating it will push the tech companies elsewhere. What else? Regulation of financial markets, environmental regulations. What else?
Nuclear weapons,
I mean,
probably.
there's so many areas.
Yeah, the list is long. You said nuclear proliferation.
Yeah, nuclear weapons.
It seems that the common denominator is all these problems would require wisdom and restraint, or wisdom in the form of restraint, aka regulation. And every time the people who, or the country that does not put forth regulations or enact regulations, would have a competitive disadvantage. So everyone loses
Well,
out because
they'd have a disadvantage if they regulate it. So there's an incentive not to regulate, or even to deregulate.
Right. Talking about incentives, investment banker Charlie Munger once said, "Show me the incentives, and I will show you the outcome."
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
So, what do you make of this quote in the context of SIMPOL?
Yeah. Well, that's absolutely right. This is the incentive system that we have, and it results very simply from a globalized economy, but only national governance. And if you look at it, I sometimes like to look at it in an evolutionary context, that human social units have increased from families to bands to tribes to middle-aged small states to nation states. They have successively expanded. The EU, they've successively expanded in size. Why? Because they were catching up with the economics all the time, right? And we are now at the next level where this is the big one, if you like. It's the global level, and ultimately, either we will have to learn to cooperate globally, or we will just go down the tubes. maybe not in one big explosion. But there's one other issue which I think increasingly could be almost the most important issue for SIMPOL, and that is declining birth rates. I don't know if this is a topic that people in Germany are I should think
We are
it's
aware of
probably it's coming up the agenda more and more.
Yeah, today I read that last year there were like first time the population of Germany shrinked like 110,000 or something, less than the year before. So yeah, it's definitely also the demographic profile of Germany. You know, we've been seeing this for decades, and
Yeah,
right now we're trying to grapple with the implications of that politically, trying to reform our systems, our pension systems, and all that stuff. But yeah, it's a
yeah.
big problem.
Well, it's a problem just about all over the world. And demographers even expect that even where birth rates are increasing, like in sub-Saharan Africa, that eventually they will also follow us over the top and down the hill as they
Yeah.
develop.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some countries that have implemented, like Hungary has implemented pronatalist policies, but they have always, whatever they do, they have found that it doesn't make much difference. It helps a bit and then it goes back and so on. And what I think will become very clear to all nations is that the amount of money that they need to spend on this to really get birth rates back up to a sustainable level will be so much that they won't have the money. They will have to tax the multinational corporations and the tech bros and so on. And they won't be able to do that unless they do it globally and simultaneously, you know. So I think actually birth rates could almost be, you know, I suppose for some years I've been asking myself, what's going to be the crisis that either forces a collapse or something like SIMPOL? And I think, well, could it be climate? Could it be a financial crisis? But the more I think about it, it could easily be the birth rate crisis.
As tipping point for
So
all
far,
other crises.
I was betting on the climate crisis to be the big one.
Yeah,
But yeah, it could be any of these and all of these actually. Maybe
well, it could be all of them. Yeah,
the kind of the yeah. I think what strikes me so much about SIMPOL is it's the only potential solution I heard to this underlying root cause problem that you described so well with destructive international competition, which is the prisoner's dilemma or Moloch or whichever name, meta crisis, whichever name we want to give it, and offers one at least a path forward that seems feasible. So yeah,
Yeah, let's go in that conclusion and explain it a bit. I mean, nations are not the only key players. We have something like global governance and governments with the UN or the World Bank and so on and so forth. And there are NGOs and advocacy groups. Why do they seem to be unable to get a handle on these issues we discussed? Why are we torn between this political powerlessness and sometimes activist burnout?
yeah. Well, I mean, if we just look first of all at the global institutions, if you look at the United Nations, for example, the United Nations is not configured to solve global problems because although we think of the United Nations as a world-centric organization, it's actually a nation-centric organization. It was created by the nation states at the end of the Second World War, and built into the Charter of the United Nations is that the UN itself has no authority over the nation states. The only organ of the United Nations that has any authority is the Security Council, which is the top, you know, China, US,
the
Russia,
top dogs.
the top dogs. Yeah, even England still trying to be a top dog.
Well, you still
but
have a
basically,
nuke, don't you?
yeah, but you know, basically, the UN is not configured because for the UN to solve global problems, it would have to have authority over China, Russia, to some degree, to constrain those nations and all other nations to conform to a global governance framework. But the UN just doesn't have the power to do that. In a sense, what SIMPOL is trying to do is to offer citizens a way that we can drive our national governments, at least national governments in democratic countries, towards a global framework, in the hope then that non-democratic countries will join in of their own free will, because after all, they have the same problems as well. So that is really our plan. When it comes to non-governmental organizations, Tobias, that's a slightly different situation. In my experience, the sort of more activist organizations like, I don't know, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, those kind of NGOs don't really understand the way the global economy works. So they don't really understand destructive global competition. They rather come from a more activist protest kind of mindset, where they think, well, if we just protest long enough and loud enough, the government will do what we want, and they don't realize that it's not that the government doesn't want to do what they want. It's that the government can't do what they want, because it will cause uncompetitive economy and capital flight and so on.
So they're still blaming the politicians, and they still kind of have they don't really get it on some level. What would you say?
Well, absolutely. And I, whenever I've tried many times over the years to talk to these NGOs, because they have loads of supporters. If they could come together with SIMPOL, we could really get this done very quickly. But unfortunately, we're up against this sort of mindset where, what I would love to be able to do with them is to say to them, look, make a list of all your demands, right? And now, when you've made that list, split them into two columns. One column of all the demands that can be implemented unilaterally by a single government, and then all of the other demands which can't be implemented unilaterally by a single government.
Well, it can be implemented, but then at a competitive disadvantage.
It can't be because of the disadvantage. So
yeah, but
if they would honestly make that, make those two lists, I think they would see that probably most of their demands are in the simultaneous category. They're in the policies that would have to be implemented by all or sufficient nations simultaneously.
Yeah, but then they would also, I guess, they would lose the villain in their story, and they cannot be the hero in their own story anymore. Isn't that true?
Well, this is it, and this you're right, Dennis. They draw a lot of energy, support, and funding from this us versus them dynamic. We're the good guys. Politicians and corporations are the bad guys. You need to fund us to fight. And whereas SIMPOL is like your, I can't remember the guy you just quoted, this investment manager, has shown me the incentives, and I'll tell you the outcome. Right. And unfortunately, this is the problem. The incentives or the disincentives for governments are just too high.
Maybe they don't like thinking in terms of economics so much. or have an allergy against anything economic, or I don't know what would explain that, but somehow it doesn't track for them.
No, which is a shame. So we find actually paradoxically that the people who understand SIMPOL best of all are actually the politicians. Which in a sense isn't a surprise, because they're the ones who are on the horns of the dilemma every day, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember talking to one member of parliament in Norway who was in their trade and industry group, and I asked him. I said, "Tell me, how many of your decisions are sort of driven by the need to keep Norway internationally competitive?" And he kind of thought about it for a moment or two, and then he sort of said, "Well, all of them."
All right.
You know,
So,
and so this is so the politicians understand. Not all of them, but many of them understand that this is a problem. And in fact, many who have signed the pledge have sort of thanked us. You know, they've signed not because of the electoral pressure that our supporters can apply, but simply because they think SIMPOL's a good idea that solves their
mm.
problem. You
I
know,
was thinking at some point also from it in terms of simple actually being a didactic intervention, almost like to drive home a point that they would have not otherwise gotten in a sense. They know they are under the pressure of international of this destructive competitive. They feel it. I mean, they feel the competition aspect, but they're being had by it instead of having it. So
exactly.
they they're subject of this mechanism, and once they get the words for it and this and the concept, and they can make it object and actually look at it and think, what the
Exactly.
fuck are we doing here? Maybe they can step back and make a different choice. I think that's for
Yeah,
me what I see
that's
as
a
the
very
power
good
of
way.
the
Yeah,
power
that's a
of the
brilliant way
campaign.
to put it, Dennis. Is it to, right now we are all its subjects. Simple allows us to make it the object and
Yeah,
to actually then act on it.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's part for the inner part of ourselves. I can make it as an object. I can be conscious about this kind of global competition. But on the other
Yeah,
hand, like on the outside, we have still this, um, yeah, this conflict about who holds the power. I mean, in democratic states, we have this principle of subsidiarity. Problems should be addressed at the lowest possible level where they can be solved. So local governments do not want to cede authority to state governments, and state governments do not want to cede authority to the national governments, and the national governments do not want to give power to a higher authority, such as the EU. So, how do you think can we balance this tension between local solution that are as decentralized as possible and global regulation, where I really freely
yeah,
give power to
yeah.
something
Well, I
greater?
mean, this is something that is built in to Simpol. I mean, I can't really speak so much from local to regional to national levels, but between the national and the global level, Simpol has this built in its very name, because the only policies that qualify for being included in Simpol are those that nations cannot implement unilaterally or as a small group. So the EU can't do it. It has to have everybody.
Mhm.
So Simple immediately excludes any policy that can be handled unilaterally by a single nation or by a group of nations like the EU. And so in that sense, we have a very clear subsidiarity criterion. So we apply that. You know, if someone suggests a policy for Simpol, we immediately apply the test. Would the unilateral implementation of that policy be possible without causing a significant competitive disadvantage? Yes or no. If the answer is yes, it sorry, where am I getting myself? Anyway, getting myself confused now. So, if it can't be implemented unilaterally, it falls into the simultaneous category. If it can be implemented unilaterally, it doesn't, it doesn't qualify. And in that way, we keep a very clear dividing line between global and national, and that's really important.
kind of a filter function on in terms of subsidiarity or not, in terms of which policies will even get discussed at an international or global level, and which ones remain strictly domestic policies of
Precisely.
on a national level.
Precisely,
So,
Dennis. And that also, if you think about it, that enhances national sovereignty.
right.
Because by doing that, you safeguard national sovereignty to the maximum for those issues that can be implemented by any nation alone. But you enhance the national sovereignty through SIMPOL, because that in that way, nations can solve problems that they can't solve today. Right. So you're winning on both
Yeah.
in a way. Right.
So we sometimes think in terms of polarities and polarity management, and probably should do a podcast about one of these concepts someday. Quick mental note here. So I clearly see there's a polarity between doing national policies or national politics and global policies or global politics. So in a sense, and you would say, if both sides of the polarity are played and not just one, like only the kind of the national in that sense. So if there's no simultaneous policy, you're clearly not doing global politics. You're just doing your own stuff. You're seeking your own advantage, thereby damaging yourself and all the others. So that's what you get for just ignoring the other pole of that polarity. So once you do, yeah. So once you maybe neglect, I mean, that's, I guess, the fear of those people who are afraid of something like a world government or something, that if
Mm.
you only play, let's say, this like a totalitarian world regime
Yeah.
with no
Yeah.
checks and
Exactly. That would be the
balances,
other. That would be the
that
other
would be kind
pole.
of the
Yeah.
disadvantage of the other side of the street.
E-
I mean,
exactly.
there's advantages to be had, but there's also dangers on that level. Like, can you give us the difference between world government and one world governance? So how would
Okay.
you
Yeah. So
distinguish that?
so world government is a single entity, a single government institution that uh, that effectively would be taking the global pole and ignoring or de-emphasizing the role of the nation state. Okay, that would be that, to my mind, it might solve some problems, but it would create a whole pile of other ones. Right, so that's not what we need. Simpol is something that sits in between. It's not a world government, but it is also beyond the nation state. But it is only beyond the nation state where it needs to be, where there is a logic for it, and where it is in all nations' interests to
Could one say
cooperate.
only minimally sufficient global?
Yes,
in
that's
in a
right.
way. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, bringing it in at a kind of social level, Dennis. You have the tussle between globalism and globalism and multiculturalism on one side, and nationalism and closed borders on the other, right?
Hmm.
Hmm.
And we don't actually have a word for something in the middle like Simpol. So but I call it simulculturalism, right? It's not multiculturalism, it's not uniculturalism, it's simulculturalism. It's all nations being supported simultaneously and independently, so that all nations win and all cultures win.
I
Because
mean,
if
there's
if if if
one
everyone can be,
expression.
if sorry,
Just saying, there's one expression which maybe captures, and I'm not. Let me know what you think. But there's diversity, and then there's unity in diversity, which is not suppressing
hmm,
diversity, but also not portraying partners as being fragmented. Like we're yes, we have our unique national German identity, and you have your British national identity, but that does not mean we're separated. We're diverse, but we're not disunited. We can still act
precisely.
in unison and
Exactly. And if you think about it, the idea of simultaneity is the reconciliation of unity and diversity. because if we are acting simultaneously, we could only be doing things simultaneously if we were individuals, but we're doing it at the same time. That's the unity. So you've got the unity and the diversity reconciled just in
I
that
was
one
just
word.
thinking of a biological metaphor. If the body, like it has different kind of cells, and if they all act individually, one part of my arm goes this way, and the other way. That would, or my
Yeah,
liver does something else,
yeah,
or goes in a different direction than my
yeah,
brain or whatnot. Then that would not work
exactly.
out. But if
And
we,
that's exactly, and that's absolutely the right analogy, Dennis, because, you know, and John Stewart, the evolutionary biologist, was very, very good on this. He says that all your cells have the same DNA, right? And that the DNA is acting globally and simultaneously across all your cells, right?
hmm,
Now, if that stops happening, what you've got is cancer,
yeah.
right? You've got some cells that are no longer governed by that global and simultaneous arrangement. They are
Mm.
going their own way.
It's an interesting
And
metaphor, yes.
you know,
Hmm.
you know what happens if that goes too far, right?
Right. So too much individuality on the part of the cells is no good.
Yeah,
But then in the end, we need the differentiation of cells into
exactly.
specific functions, and every state, I mean, in the global
Yes,
economy, that's certainly true. Every state has fulfills a certain function. That one is good at chips and other at producing champagne or whatnot.
yeah.
That's different. I mean, in a global economy, that's certainly differentiation there.
I'm still trying to work out what Britain might be good for, Dennis, but
Well, you got Monty Python. Soccer, it's
I,
not soccer. Sure. Okay, except for Harry Kane, maybe. Uh,
yeah,
but yeah. Anyway, yeah, but let's go a little deeper into the how that would actually work. So let's say, so you're saying we just need the voters of individual countries convince the politicians by means of friendly coercion to sign the simple pledge. So I sometimes have this image of a string of pearls being strung up on a necklace, like, and simple being kind of the thing, the thread that kind of collects those pearls, meaning those countries that would support a simultaneous action, like one by one by one. And on the national level, you would start with your local member of parliament that you convince to sign up. So you string up those pearls on the national level, and once the country flipped to a pro simple country, you're basically done. You can wait for the other, or support the campaigns in other countries if you're bored or something. And then those countries would all give, at some point, will all give green light, at which point it would make sense to actually act simultaneously. It wouldn't make sense to act before that, right? Because it would be a
yeah. Well,
competitive
they couldn't.
disadvantage.
Yeah, what threshold has to be crossed?
Well, we say all or sufficient nations to be, because in fact the threshold depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about nuclear weapons, it probably needs to be all the nations that have nuclear weapons and all those that are suspected of having them or nearly having them. But
Mhm.
if you are talking, so that's maybe, I don't know how many nations that is, maybe 20 perhaps. If, on the other hand, you're talking about corporation tax, it probably has to be almost all nations. So it
At the
depends.
AI race, you need only USA and China at the current moment.
Yeah.
With the others,
Well, that's right.
collapse.
Yes, that's right.
Mm,
Um, so another aspect. So the threshold depends on the policy that you're talking about. But another aspect with SIMPOL is that we would advocate for multi-issue agreements. Okay,
right.
so we're not talking about all global problems being solved together on one day. That would be crazy, right? But what we're talking about is maybe you would have, for example, you might have a climate agreement plus a global currency transactions tax together, so that the funds you raise from the tax can be used to compensate or finance the emissions reductions on the climate part of the agreement. One of the reasons I think that the UN is doing such a poor job of solving global problems is just dealing with one issue at a time. So, like, you have the COP process just about climate change, and I know there are some financial instruments in there, but they're not really. They're more like promises of what each country will invest. What we need is a global tax raising regime that, like a Tobin tax or a currency transactions tax, which, just a small percentage could raise billions and billions and billions of dollars globally, which can then be channeled into solving the climate crisis, for example.
So the losers on the climate agreement would be recompensated to some degree and made be agreed to other parts of that agreement that they otherwise wouldn't have agreed to.
Precisely, because if you just deal with one issue at a time, there are no trade-offs. There are no opportunities for trade-offs, for compensations, for there's no way to square the circle. If you mix two or more issues together, you have the opportunity. What a nation might lose on one issue, it can gain on another, and you have the opportunity to make an agreement that is broadly in every nation's interests. So
it would seem to me that you talk about multi-package agreements or something like that. It would seem to me one of those issues always includes taxation or getting back clawing back the funds from those like dark channels or like not dark channels, whatever the legal current channels of where tax evasion just happens or where funds just go over the financial elites just park their money here or there, and to stop that, right? And then a lot of things could be possible if we actually
precisely. And part of that, Dennis, might be where that you pay off the tax havens to some degree to because they're going to lose a lot of business. Okay, so you from all those billions you're raising from the global tax, you can support them to some degree to transition towards a more socially positive way of running their economy.
But I see one danger is that with this, so if you would raise a global tax so nobody could evade those taxes on the planet Earth, then some billionaires might even look in flying to Mars or traveling there just to not get taxed, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do. I know exactly who you mean, Dennis. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
yeah, right. But that would be the idea, right? To say currently there's a lot of evasion possible because you can go here or there or park your money here or there, or create a shell company or whatnot. But if tax is everywhere simultaneously global, there's no escape unless you don't like our blue planet. Then then you have to pay your fair share, and it can be reused to solve actual problems. Yeah.
It also, people sometimes say, well, okay, so what about North Korea, or what about, the nations that people perceive would never agree to anything like this? Well, that's probably correct, but then the vast majority of nations could implement it in such a way that non-participating countries cannot benefit. Okay, they may not be punished, but they cannot benefit.
Which is kind of a punishment in itself, a disincentive in itself.
Yeah, exactly. So but I think it's very hard to imagine something like this now. But as the sort of the global crisis gets worse and worse and worse, something like SIMPOL becomes more and more realistic and more
Yeah.
of an imperative, because the alternative is just complete collapse.
That's what I wanted to point out. I mean, the path to integrating all these necessary countries, I think that's a long one. And so far, we can see that very powerful countries or groups of countries, such as the EU, are trying to enact these regulations, for example, on AI, on climate, health, for example, bans on certain fertilizers, and so on and so forth. And they hope that because they represent such a large market in the world, it won't be worth it for international companies to ignore these regulations in the rest of the world and produce then two different products, one with regulation and one without, since a large portion of their products in this market goes to these special countries like the EU. I think this could also be a way forward without everyone having to sit down at the same table.
Well, what the EU is trying to do is, I think it's called border adjustment. So if you want to sell into the EU from a third country, uh, if you have to pay a tariff effectively to even, because the your competitors in the EU are having to conform to higher standards, right? So it's making other countries, forcing them to adopt those standards, or paying for not doing so, to try and sort of even up these scores. And that it remains to be seen. That may work, Tobias. I don't know. We have to wait and see. I think it will work to some degree, but I think ultimately you're probably going to need something more global and more robust,
Yes,
I
yes.
suspect.
Yeah. Yeah, so SIMPOL hasn't defined any concrete policy proposal yet. Those are supposed to be developed democratically once there's enough support, right?
Correct. Well, there's two reasons to this. One is, as you say, that it needs to be done democratically. So it would not be very democratic if I was to say
Of course.
what the policy. But also the other point is, as Dennis says, it's a process of adding pearls to the string, and so there's no point in developing the policies until you've got enough pearls on the string, right? Until you've got enough nations, who are on board in principle, then you can start having a proper negotiation about what the policies, SIMPOL 1, SIMPOL 2, SIMPOL 3, what the different SIMPOL packages might be.
Yeah. What do you tell to people who say, show me what you want first, or the policy, and then I decide if I was signed or not?
Well, I explained to them exactly what I've just explained to you. I said, well, that wouldn't be very democratic, and
Yeah.
even if I did have a good policy, you probably wouldn't trust me anyway, and you probably shouldn't. So it's just not practical right now. The name of the game, in my view, is building that consensus. The policy development side of SIMPOL would come much later.
Yeah.
How do you envision that process? So let's say we're getting there, and let's say there's a policy package on the table. How would who and how would who would be involved in creating these policies? How would citizens be able to influence those? What do you think? What role do politicians play and autocrats in that picture?
Yeah. Well, that's quite a long story, Dennis. I mean, there's a document you can download from our website which is called the SIMPOL Information Pack, and
Mhm.
in that there is an outline of how we envisage policies being developed,
Mhm.
um, and that would be a combination of citizens, feeding their ideas. It could also be NGOs. It could be think tanks. It could, also obviously politicians. And I think, putting it simply, I think in each nation you would have a process whereby each nation would have a top 10 list of global issues, which would of course be slightly different for every country because different countries have different priorities. But then you would bring them together to sort of see which issues are at the top of most people's lists and how they could be combined together so that you can get the trade-offs that we were talking about earlier. But listen, this is not, it is not easy. And I don't pretend to have all the answers to that. What I do know is that if we don't have a process, if we don't have some way of cooperating on global issues, we are really not going to be around for very much longer.
So it seems like we have to kind of build the tracks where we're driving a train and build a bridge across the chasm while we're riding it.
Yeah, in some ways, yes, but I don't think I don't think it's totally blind in the sense that if you look at a nation state, if you look at Germany, for example, you have all the different Länder, and you have some very poor Länder, some rich Länder. You have Bavaria where everything is lovely, and you have other parts of Germany where it's not so lovely. But the government is able to take from the rich and to support the poor, so that Germany
socialism,
as a whole,
communism.
Well, no, it's just a gentle redistribution.
Okay.
It's for social cohesion, so that Germany feels itself to be an individual nation. Otherwise, it would just fall apart, right?
Right.
Back to the old days, So you can do the same thing at the global level. There is no reason that the same principle cannot apply at the global level too.
Yeah. So in a sense, you're kind of riding on the waves of evolution just all the way to the top, right? Because that's the same mechanism that has always been like transcend and include like smaller entities like cell organelles were swimming in the soup, and then at some point kind of the border dropped around them and they became one, like they acted simultaneously, let's say, those organelles in the cell, and then you had organs and organisms forming that would and of course then collectives of these individuals in ever larger scales trying to coordinate themselves, right?
Yeah,
So you have a
exactly.
recursive pattern here.
Absolutely, it's like a fractal, a fractal in a way. And again, Dennis, coming back to the biology, all of these key transitions were global in the sense that they applied to every entity in the cell or in the molecule or whatever, and it was applied simultaneously, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is nothing new. Global and simultaneous implementation is nothing new. When Sweden changed from driving on the left to driving on the right, it happened at 6 a.m., I think, on a particular date across the whole of Sweden. Okay, global and simultaneous implementation. When any law is passed in Germany or in any other country, it's implemented across the whole of Germany, and it comes in on a certain date.
Right. Yeah, we're from the self-management space, so we deal with holacracy implementations, and those documents are ratified, and the day before, it was not official, and after that, it's official that the company practices self-management according to the holacracy constitution, which is also it's a similar mechanism. It just starts like a switch, and then it's switched on. Then it's kind of something you can lean on, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's another thing I think that I think is worth mentioning is that I think something like SIMPOL, which is not a world government. It is really just a methodology for getting agreement on certain specific global problems. I think that is a more likely way for the evolution of global governance, because I think when citizens when citizens see the practical benefits of global cooperation coming through, they'll be then saying, "Oh, what else can we do? What else can
Right.
we build
Right.
on this?" Whereas right now, I think when people see the EU even or the United Nations, they just sort of
Yeah.
because they don't. Well, with the EU, they maybe see benefits, but with United Nations or some other sort of more global institutions, they just don't see the benefits. They just see a big bureaucracy with too much money going into it.
Right.
So I think it's a little bit like the EU itself developed from a cooperation of the iron and steel and coal industries, and then gradually it kind of grew from that the practical benefits that people could see, were forthcoming from that arrangement, and then you
Right.
you build on it.
Talking about that transformation and development, you mentioned before that many people don't fully understand this destructive global competition and therefore don't quite grasp why national governments aren't making any changes. And then, as we're seeing right now in Europe, out of frustration, they tend to vote more right-wing nationalist parties. So, how would you explain or communicate this simple message for a traditional or a classic liberal or a postmodern voter as they come from different levels or stages
Different
of inner
parties.
development?
Yeah, well, I mean, so if on the face of it, Simpol tends to appeal more to the left, so to the Green parties, because it's about global
Redistribution.
yeah, well, a certain amount of redistribution, regulation, global cooperation.
Right.
But for the parties of the right, Simpol has a lot to offer them as well, but you need to look a little bit closer. So, number one, the whole idea of simultaneous implementation to safeguard the competitiveness of every country, that is a key demand of the right, of the sort of center right.
Mhm.
Secondly, if you can tax the multinational corporations and the tech bros, and you can channel some of that money to developing countries in a controlled and sensible way so that those countries can develop, and people in those countries can make a decent living at home, which is, after all, what most people want to do, then you won't get the mass migration that is currently diluting cultures in the richer north. And therefore, something like Simpol is in the interests of the the nationalists, because it will actually safeguard healthy, independent, to some degree, more ethnically identified,
Homogeneous.
countries everywhere, not just
Hmm.
in the north, but also in the south, right?
Hmm.
Because the current multicultural, borderless mush problem, what the left people on the left don't realize is that as people are migrating, often they are the brightest and youngest people from those countries. Those countries have no future without those people. What
Yeah.
we
There's a
what we
brain
need
drain.
is a global regime that will support developing countries so that people don't have to migrate in rubber boats or in any other way. You know,
Hmm.
so of course it's easier said than done. I completely get it, but you know, tell me
Yeah,
what's the alternative?
Right. 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 Right.
I totally agree with you. What I'm asking myself is always, not everybody is understanding or is thinking about the topics we are talking right now, and maybe they get it like on a intellectual level, but that's something different if you truly see or feel internally this problem. And I mean, I
That's
hear
very
you.
true, Tobias, and that is absolutely almost my biggest problem is is exactly this it's a cognitive development of people. And the biggest problem I have is when somebody like Dennis many years ago, the minute they get SIMPOL, they think, oh, this is so obvious. I can explain this to everybody, right? Everybody will get it, because it's so simple, But what you don't realize is that when you're on planet SIMPOL, if you're not on planet SIMPOL, still on planet Earth. Planet SIMPOL looks miles and miles, looks as far away as the moon. When you're on planet SIMPOL, the Earth is very close. You just want people just to jump across, but it's a most people in the West are what I would call nation-centric. They see the world through kind of national glasses. So if you say, I don't know, cutting some certain regulations will make Germany more competitive, right? And will bring investment to Germany. Most Germans will say, "Well, yeah, that's a good thing," right?
Mhm.
But when you see world centrically and you see that every country is playing the same game and that actually nobody's going to win from that, then you realize, oh shit, that's not a good thing, right?
We're being
So
played by the financial elites or whatever. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. But that's the difference. If you're still thinking nation centrically, which most of us are, then you SIMPOL won't really make any sense to you, you know. But when you start to see when you see world centrically, you see the whole system and how it works together and how destructive global competition, then you suddenly see, oh shit, yes, SIMPOL is obvious. We need something like that.
So it's really a kind of a systems perspective and a systems thinking perspective in some way, or a post-conventional insight that once you have, yeah, once you get a certain distance from just national thinking and just expand your horizon and look beyond your nation state and see the mechanisms at play, that's when you get yeah, why this is the only feasible answer at all, or why it must be this way.
It's like you were saying earlier. It's what is now subject becomes object, because you
Hmm.
you move above it and you can see it and you can act on it. But whilst
Right.
you are still at the national level, you're in it and you can't get any distance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can't expect that all the people from the world in the different countries move from ethnocentric or nation-centric to world-centric worldview. So, from your experience of the last 25 years, what helps to open their eyes to this without, have this massive transformation of their inner being and worldview?
I think that it needs a critical mass of people who are at a post-conventional or integral or whatever you want to call it level,
Hmm.
to kind of get the snowball rolling, and then I think it will have a momentum all of its own. My problem has been that even getting that critical number of people involved and convinced and willing to work on it, I'm still struggling with that.
Right.
I had thought at one time, Dennis will remember, we were doing a lot with the integral theory
Right.
people, but even there, I kind of gave up because you know I I, I don't think I think well they may be very very evolved in many lines of development. I think in their sort of civic political line of development is another matter.
It's lacking a bit behind, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I don't understand why. As you said, like back then, I was like, okay, if there's anything like integral politics, so I was to just to, yeah, to go back. Like when did we meet? Like 2011, 12, something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I was still working for Integrales Forum, and we invited you to the 2012 conference, and I was like, okay, if there's anything like integral politics, this is kind of the seed idea here that everybody needs to get, and once they get it, yeah, sure, we can create some momentum here. And yeah, it's like as if it's still too far out for people, but time has passed since then, and I think when I look around in my networks and um, on podcast platforms that I listen to, for example, The Great Simplification or by Nate Higgins as such, there is global awareness. There is an increasing number of people, maybe not in Germany, all of them, but everywhere in the world that are also Daniel Schmachtenberger with becoming aware of the Moloch dynamic, which is just the same. It's just
Yeah.
he once called it the generator function for all these
Yes.
problems, which I
Yeah.
love. It's a great
Yeah.
term because
Yeah.
it generates all these dilemmas in different shapes and form. And he said, just if we can solve this, then all the other ones can unravel one by one, and that's just that's inspiring, I think, because wow, uh, it's
Well, I
it,
wrote to
it's a
him and I sent him my book, but
yeah,
somehow no response.
low bandwidth yeah, who knows? I mean, that's puzzling to me because it's just like hand hand to glove or something. It should just fit. Um, yeah, all I can do and all we can do also with Islands of Resonance is to get these ideas out there and help people find them because I feel like, yeah, it's highly relevant. And yeah, as you say, show me a better idea. I haven't come across any. Um, and we do need also looked at it from system theory perspective. So I'm referring here to the viable system model by Stafford Beer. We do need some kind of neurology of the planetary of planetary functions, right? So we need some kind of coordination mechanism because we have those coordination mechanisms on lower levels, but the one on the global level is sorely lacking. There's just a big, huge global governance gap, as you say, and we need something. And if it's bad and crappy at first, or I don't care. I mean, but it would be a start. It would be like something. We there may not be all the details fleshed out, but there's a lot of thinking has been done, and I applaud you for that. And we can probably improve upon it, but we need to get started with this. I
Yeah.
mean, yesterday,
Absolutely. I mean, it's like I said, when you're talking about the policy development, I don't pretend to have all the answers here, and
right,
I want people to come in and
right,
improve it and to bring their expertise and so forth. All I've done really is just, set up the outlines of how
right,
it could work and how citizens can be involved, how they can use their votes to incentivize politicians. And I mean, we know it works because we've got over 100 members of parliament in the UK who've signed up to this. They're
and
sitting in Westminster right now. They're coming from all the different, well, most of the main parties. Um, we've got MPs in Ireland, in Germany, in the European Parliament, one or two in Australia, one or two in Canada. So we know the process
proof of
works.
concept is
Yeah,
there. We just need,
yeah.
or it just needs more people picking it up, writing to the MPs, getting the ball rolling, right? So more.
Well, absolutely. Yeah,
Mm,
Can you maybe give us some more details where Simple stand today? So you mentioned already some achievements and countries where Simple is active. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, we have coordinators in a number of countries. In Germany, it's a gentleman called Dirk Weller that Dennis knows very well. You may know him, Tobias, perhaps. Um, And if you sign on to SIMPOL, if you're in Germany, for example, your sign-on information would be passed to the national coordinator of your country, and then he can be in touch or she can be in touch with you and to tell you what's going on in your country. So in some countries, we're obviously further ahead than others. But at the moment, it is still quite informal. And we are focusing mostly on politicians and elections. So when an election comes round, our campaign rolls into action very strongly in that country, and we try to get as many politicians signed up as we can. But of course, citizens can also help with that, because if citizens are writing to their candidates at the same time, that obviously shows the candidates that there are real votes behind this, and it's in their interest to sign up.
Right.
Interesting, yeah.
And you've pulled this off with just a handful of people, right? So it's not like super like a big, huge team that pulled this
No, I
off.
mean, Dennis, if you think about it, we've got like 20% of the UK Parliament signed up, and the number of us in the UK that achieved that was tiny.
Tiny.
I mean,
Let's
really tiny.
let's not
You could
disclose the numbers.
But
Right.
my point is, coming back to this domino effect I was talking about earlier, it doesn't need many of us to do this.
Oh yeah, and Margaret Mead once said, "Never trust that a dedicated group of people can change the course of affairs," or something like that. It
Yeah,
never was
yeah,
something else
exactly.
or something to that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
according to.
exactly. So the obviously it will need millions of people, but SIMPOL is very high leverage.
Right.
It has a huge leverage potential,
Hmm.
simply because we're not saying we are, instead of the current politics assumes that we citizens have to choose like pigeons between the different parties. What SIMPOL does is it turns that around, and it says, this is the simultaneous policy. You parties are going to compete to sign up to what we want. You know,
Right.
and
Which is in
I'd
their
say,
best interest.
yeah. And so I mean, sometimes in England at elections, the candidates or their assistants will come round your house to your house, come around the houses and knock on people's doors. So on a number of occasions, this has happened, and when they knock on my door and they say, "Oh, good morning, Mr. Bunzl. There's an election coming up next week. Can we count? Can you are you intending to vote for Labour or for whatever the party is?" And then I just say, well, actually, I'm going to be giving strong preference to any of the candidates that signs up to SIMPOL. And the guy just sort of looks at me for a minute, and then he says, "Well, what's SIMPOL?" And then I hand him a leaflet and a pledge form, and I send him on his way.
Yeah,
so
that's
so
powerful. Yeah.
so this is telling politicians now that we've had enough of them. We've had it up to here. Now they are going to do what we need them to do.
Hmm.
We're not going to fuck around with their stupid game anymore. It's already ruined our votes. So now we're going to use our votes creatively to get them to do what they need to do at the global level, at least.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a moment for the gong to
Yeah,
express
yeah.
resonance.
It's time out. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's time up. Time's up. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, I
Yeah.
think what is so inspiring for me when I first learned about it is like, okay, all around us we're seeing vicious circles everywhere, vicious circles in terms of race to the bottom dynamics in these different domains where destructive international competition wreaks havoc, right? But with SIMPOL, I I can see how there can be a virtuous circle, like an upward spiral with momentum building and hope rising, and people getting it, and politicians getting it, and coordination unfolding, and ideas being refined and funds being redistributed and the right fucking thing done on the global stage, which feels like forever or rarely happens. So and to envision that, it's like, okay, what am I wasting my time on? uh, why wait?
Yeah,
It just yeah,
yeah.
that's all it's
Well, absolutely, and I think I suppose it's great to be asked to do podcasts like this, you guys, because it helps if people are listening. It helps them to model in their mind, to build a model in their mind that is of world centric, of how world centric politics could work, right? Because if you don't have that model in your mind, it doesn't make sense. But when you can start to sort of see what destructive global competition is all about and how simultaneous
yeah,
implementation could solve it, it all starts to become
Yeah.
more real for
It's
you.
a
yeah,
it's a training for this worldview or models of thinking.
that,
Mm,
and
mm.
it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's like a party. It happens when you invite people and they show up one by one by one, and everybody expects the other to show up. And because everybody expects everybody else to show up, everybody else shows up. And if you don't say there's a party and there's nothing, so you need a vision. The vision is the party in a sense, and the vision is where people can align around and say, yeah, that's what we're here for, and we wait until we have enough pearls on the string. Okay, but meanwhile we're here to do this thing once it arrives, and signaling to each other that it's feasible, that it's like, yeah, here are reasonable nations wanting to do the reasonable thing. Who else is with us? And building coalitions this way, and signaling, yeah, that there may be different attractors for the future, because the current attractors don't look so good. like
Exactly,
the
exactly.
how
And just coming back to the birth rate thing, um, is to me, declining birth rates are a sign that we have, what do we worship? Are we worshipping money, or are we worshipping human flourishing and God,
yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
are religious?
kids I mean, this is, I think, I remember it's the Sting line, Sting singing, the Russian have kids too, or something like that, in his song. Back then it was about the nuclear threat, of course, the madness of the 80s. But realizing that we have kids too, and the Russians love their kids too, something like that. So that's, I think, that
Yeah,
was the line.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and if we don't, I can see the symbolism here, because we are not investing literally in the future. If something is a representative of the future, it's the kids. Like, if we don't
Yeah,
birth any newness into the world,
yeah,
literally,
yeah.
we're just going to
Well,
crumble.
we've,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, we've created an economy that makes it, that allows us to produce but not to reproduce,
right.
right? So in a sense, if and the nations that are have the lowest birth rates are South Korea and Japan, are those Asian economies where the work ethic is so culturally strong. And if you think about it globally, what we have is we've created an economy that is eating up humanity. It's eating up human
Yeah,
needs.
yeah.
And
The,
in the end, you will have, you may have protected your competitiveness and your GDP will be going up and you may be winning economically, but there'll be no one around to clap,
Yeah,
because
no, it
we'll all
reminds
be
me of
dead.
do you know this meme or cartoon where the like a guy sits around a campfire with a few kids and then tells the story. Yeah, the world has gone down the toilet, but we had a few peak moments of shareholder investments or along the way, or something like that. It's like, we're like, okay, great. yeah, that's obviously not the purpose of life, and um, we need, yeah,
Exactly.
we need new vision and hope for the
Yeah.
future.
So I suppose there's a deeper message there behind SIMPOL as well. It's not just a kind of political idea. I think it's also it's more fundamental about what are we here for on this planet? Not
Yeah,
just about the bottom line of the next shareholders
yeah,
meeting.
Yeah, but that's another tricky question. I mean, in this time, short-term thinking is economically rewarded, and also like, why am I here for on the world? But it's not just about me. It's just not that I have a comfortable life. It's more like, again, the long-term perspective. Um, Me
yeah,
and as a group and the next generations.
Yeah,
It's me as a line of people, of
yeah.
family. Yeah.
yeah,
Actually, just but very briefly to this, if there's still time, just one last small point coming back to this sort of long-term thing is that when we get politicians to sign the pledge, they sign it for life. Okay, they don't unless they cancel it in writing. Now that means that at each new election, the politicians usually are standing again. So we are not starting from zero each time. Okay, we
Correctly.
are
Yeah.
building with each election, we're getting more and more and more and
momentum.
more. Yeah.
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 So it
That's
sort of
genius. Yeah.
transcends the electoral cycle.
Yeah. John, are you aware of other alternatives or similar initiatives like Simple?
Not really. No. There are sort of some ideas about global cooperation, and there's obviously the United Nations. There are some other NGOs, but there's none that I know of that have really identified destructive global competition, or like with Daniel Schmachtenberger, the Moloch as the generator function, and have developed an electoral mechanism for actually incentivizing politicians to go in the other direction. But having said that, I also say to people, look, if you think you can do something better with that technology, if you want to copy it, you know, you go your own way, give your project a different name, and prove to me that you can do it better than SIMPOL. And if you can, we'll join you.
Yeah.
But until then,
Yeah.
you have to prove you can do it better. But in principle, yeah, I wish there were others. I wish there were others.
Hmm.
Mm.
Hmm.
Who knows? Maybe at some point the AIs will take over and the world government
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
stuff for us and figure out. I could imagine a role for AIs in the policy discovery process, in the sense like synthesizing like vast
Yeah.
amounts of data.
Dennis, I did that. I mean, I know that there's a sort of fairly a sort of positive bias in a lot of the AI platforms, but I did this with Perplexity that I'm using
Hmm.
for birth rates, and it was very helpful in actually outlining how you could marry, how SIMPOL would be necessary at a certain level for raising the funds globally, but then national governments could spend those funds slightly differently depending on their different needs and circumstances.
Hmm.
So AI, I think, it could be enormously useful. It's certainly very helpful for us already in terms of our campaigning and uh, creating um, outreach materials and so on.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and at the same time, it's interesting because AI should be regulated as well. In sense, should be kind of subject of a simultaneous policy,
Yeah,
and not be kind of, yeah, going down like off the cliff, racing down the cliff because there's no constraining container of rules around it, right? And we need to create this container. Otherwise, yeah. I mean, the AI documentary has just appeared. It's interesting. Oh, and another idea that just occurred to me in the past. Getting from one of those levels from, let's say, from tribal to nation-centric level has usually involved the role of others, others
So we do
being
need the aliens.
they do need the aliens.
Yes. Yeah.
So they
Well,
they
this
could
is
they could unite
yeah,
us.
yeah, but John Stewart talks about this. Um, if you go to his website, evolutionarymanifesto.com or .net,
Hmm.
and he says that as you saying, Dennis and Tobias, that at every level, from families to bands to tribes to middle-aged people, there's always been an outer threat that has
Right.
forced two
Cohesion.
previously competing entities to join together against the outside threat. But at the global level, there is none.
Yeah, no
And
forcing function
so,
here.
yeah, so what Stuart is saying is we now need to move to conscious evolution, where we
Mhm.
we understand the trajectory of evolution from
Right.
to ever larger social units. We understand the mechanics of it with global and simultaneous implementation, and because we've become aware of past evolution, we can consciously now
Yeah.
choose to implement something like SIMPOL, right? We don't have to wait for it to
Yeah.
to happen or not happen, um,
So that would
because
be a deliberate mechanism this
yes,
time and
exactly.
not,
It's
yeah.
intentional,
Right.
intentional evolution or conscious evolution. Yeah,
But that does require a lot of restraint or wisdom in the form of restraint, because that's the only reason why you would restrain yourself. Otherwise, why not take everything and short-term gain only if you have foresight and can actually see the consequences of your action and decide deliberately to not go this road, but to choose a different one, a better one, the more
yeah,
whole and holistic one, then you would do that. Otherwise, yeah, you
yeah.
just are just at the
Well,
whim of you're subject to your drives and
yes, exactly.
unconscious biases, etc.
Yeah. Well, this is back again to the polarities, Dennis, isn't it? With freedom and order. The more
Hmm.
freedom we create, the more we reject order, and the more freedom we create, whether it's economic freedom or sexual freedom or whatever kind of freedom it may be. What we find then is that we have to be more responsible and conscious to regulate ourselves, because
Yeah.
otherwise,
I mean,
you know,
it's the old tension also between individualism and collectivism, right?
yeah,
Because what is good
sure,
for the individual unit, and it can be an individual on a like a one human being versus the collective versus, or it could be one nation versus the collective of nations, aka the global commons. What is good for one is not necessarily good for all, and so we need to have a mutually reinforcing and mutually beneficial relationship between those two poles. And the polarities, I love the idea that Barry Johnson says you can solve problems, but you cannot solve polarities. You can only manage polarities. So that means, yeah, you gotta see where are things in balance in terms of your polarities, and where are they going off balance, and then you need to rebalance and take into account the other pole of the polarity. And if we're high on individualism and high on my country right or wrong, then we now do the other side of this picture.
yeah,
Otherwise, we
absolutely,
incur the debts of that pole.
yeah,
That's a wonderful
exactly, exactly,
transition. John,
yeah.
imagine there's someone listening to this podcast on their way back in the car, and maybe they are convinced, maybe they are thinking about the next election. What do you want them to take away? Not as instruction, but as an inner attitude.
Well, I would encourage them to realize that the problems we have today cannot be solved anymore at the national level. And if you think that voting for this new party of the right or the left or whatever is going to solve things, I'm afraid you're going to be very disappointed. And I would encourage you to check out simpol.org, have a little look at what we are talking about, and learn more about SIMPOL, and hopefully sign up, which is completely free of charge. It takes a couple of minutes, and join our SIMPOL community of like-minded, world-centric thinking people who want to do something practical to solve these issues.
Be a good global citizen.
Yeah,
But
wonderful.
yeah, and I mean, you're quite right, Dennis. That's a great place. Citizenship. You can't be a citizen unless you've actually got a vote.
Right.
And I think what distinguishes SIMPOL from any other global initiative is the only one where you can actually use your right to vote in a powerful way. And that, I would say, makes you a genuine global citizen, perhaps for the first time. That's the unique thing about SIMPOL. It is global citizenship, in embryo, if you like.
Yeah, that's inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But only if people make it happen.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if there's somebody who wants to sign the pledge, there are also other ways to support this idea. I mean, raising awareness, sharing the idea of simple,
Yeah.
maybe contacting your representative or member of parliament and asking for
Yes.
support of
Yeah. We
simple.
we we have we have texts that our supporters can use, so they don't have to make it all up by themselves. There's also, yeah, my book that Dennis is holding up there, the co-written with Nick Duffel, the Simple Solution, which gives you a more more in-depth explanation of uh, of what we've been talking about.
Yeah, we will put
Um,
all the links in the show notes.
that would be great. Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
sure, for sure.
What do you hope will happen with your work in the future, and what impact will it have in the future? What do you think?
Well, it's right now, Tobias, with most people, very few people sort of thinking world centrically and therefore really understanding what Simple is about. It's I'm not really quite sure, but I just hope that at some stage it is out there. There's the book, there's the website. It will hopefully be picked up by politicians, I think, once they realize that they've got no other way out of this mess. Um, so that would be my hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I'm not particularly attached to any particular outcome because if I were, I would have given. I'd probably given up a long time ago.
What keeps you going still all these 25 years? Where does this energy come from?
Well, it comes from that powerful moment back in 1998 that I was telling you about.
Uh-huh.
So,
That was such a transformative sort of insight and vision that it keeps me going. So whatever happens, and what doesn't happen won't happen, and that's it.
yeah. So you received something, some information, and you just share it and see what happens, right? So
Yeah.
that's all you can do in the end, isn't it? So,
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's
yeah.
that's that's it. But I'm
Mm.
very grateful to podcasts like yours, which is a great platform, I think, to spread these ideas.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah,
Wonderful.
we love these questions we often asked in the end of a conversation. I mean, you have grandchildren. What is your advice? as an elder to the younger generation? Do you have one?
I don't know. I would say throw your smartphone down the toilet, probably. That might
Okay,
be the
that's
best
maybe a smart
advice
one.
you could give them.
Didn't Britain just rule out like unilaterally,
Yeah, yeah,
domestically,
yeah,
like
they want to.
16 is the barrier?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
That's cool. It's
That's
good.
right.
That's
But
progress.
I think, yeah, I mean, I do think that, we're already seeing it, but I think in, sort of 5 or 10 years from now, we will we will realize how damaging um, these technologies can be. I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, I'm not necessarily actually in favor of a ban, but I do think that, it's like any technology, whether it's AI, whether it's smartphones, anything like that, computers, like any technology, like a knife, can be used for good or bad, right? And you have to
Yeah,
regulate out the bads, but to keep the goods, and
right.
that's what we need to do with social media, as well as AI or anything else for that matter.
For that, you better
Yeah.
have a framework in mind that can actually do those regulations and it's not corrupted, right?
Correct,
By
Dennis.
by yeah, good, good. Just wanted to
Yeah.
clarify.
That's right. Yeah. It all
Well,
comes back to SIMPOL.
yeah,
Yeah.
in the end, right? Okay, it's been a great conversation. Let's wrap up here. And we usually do that with reflecting on what was resonant or most resonant for you, or is currently most resonant still for you from this conversation. So why don't you kick us off and share what resonated most?
Maybe I can start then, John.
You
You have
start.
still
Okay,
some time.
okay.
You think
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's do the
yeah.
other way.
I have one sentence which is sticking very to me or feel a lot of resonance is if you identify as a global citizen or if the idea resonates with you, you only truly become one when you cast your vote for it. And simple is a good and no obligation way to do that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's that's
You
that's
can you can
that's
frame
that's
that
right to be.
sentence.
I'm glad you said that, because for me also, it's sort of like it's like a personal sovereignty. It's
Hmm.
like we are not going to be driven by this system anymore. We are going to stand up, and we are going to take control, and transform the system. We're not going to become, we're not going to remain the passive playthings of the system anymore.
Hmm.
And for that, we have a vote, and you can use it, you
Yeah.
know.
So if I think about what resonated most with me, first of all, I think reconnecting with you was awesome. Thank you so much for doing
Yeah,
this.
likewise.
Was great to, yeah, I remember all these ideas and oh yeah, that was such a good idea. What happened to it anyway? In the meantime, it was good to follow up on that for me. And yeah, I feel like reinvigorated, re-inspired by this vision. And I just realized all the good things in my life were also kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. They happened because I saw them first in my mind and in this, in this subtle way of, yeah, it really evolution, if you want, moves down from those subtle levels to the very concrete, manifest changes in material reality. But it starts with an idea. It starts with a vision, and you've provided such a beautiful one, and it really, yeah, rekindled my interest in getting this out and yeah, I mean, again, show me something better. I will sign up for that. But in the meantime, I will sign up for Simple, and I will keep telling friends about it, and I hope the listeners of our podcast will do the same and check it out, and don't sign anything you don't believe in. So check it out, and maybe we can all dream ourselves into it.
Yeah, that's what we need to do: dream and act
Right.
all together. Yeah, no, I'm with you, Dennis, and Tobias. I think it's yeah, it's we need something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any last points of resonance for you? Something that came up that you found
But I mean,
remarkable?
I very much like the polarities thing, and I mean, if you go onto our on our website, I did a little 10-part series called "The Global Politics of Love," and in that I'm dealing with those polarities of unity and diversity, freedom and order, masculine and feminine, globalism and nationalism. All of those things come up in that little series, and as you say, Dennis, it's finding that balance in between. But often we don't have a word for that, because we have a word for the poles, but we don't have a word for the all important balance between them.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're striving for, and that's kind of the magical aim in a way for all of us, I guess. Yeah.
Maybe in 200 years, the society will call this balance simple.
Yeah, or maybe in 200 years they will dig up this podcast and say, "Hey, those guys already talked about it."
Yeah.
Thank God, thank God, this podcast happened, and you, dear listener, can make a change. So help us get the word out. So,
thank you
very
much.
Guys.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. Okay. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, and it's great to connect, Dennis, again after all these years.